Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz1st Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business news and developments impacting the economy. On the economic front this week, the biggest shocker, of course, was the growth data released by the Department of Census and Statistics, which put Sri Lanka's growth rate at 3.1% for 2017, the lowest growth rate in 16 years. Also this week, we saw the no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe being presented in Parliament. The no-confidence motion will be taken up on the 4th of April. Also on the program today, we'll be looking at the comments made by the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka on the need for political stability in the country. Later on, we'll be joined by Professor Michael Naus. He'll be talking about the moves that are being taken to make Sri Lanka's Rajarata University the first campus in the region to adopt a zero emissions policy. First, a look at this week's top stories.
The Department of Census and Statistics said Sri Lanka's weather-battered economy grew by 3.1% in 2017, a deceleration from 4.4% recorded in 2016. According to the data released, the agriculture sector reported a negative 0.8% overall growth rate, while the highest growth rate of 3.9% was recorded from industrial activities. The services sector grew by 3.2% compared to the previous year. Addressing a seminar on financial inclusion in Colombo, Central Bank Governor Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy said the overall growth rate is disappointing, but said the underlying fundamentals in terms of the growth framework seems to be...
The overall growth rate is disappointing. I think the Census and Statistics Department will put out a number which is not as high as we would like it to be. But the underlying fundamentals in terms of the growth framework seem to be improving. That is reflected in the fact that we had a record year for exports last year from a very low base. You know, it's nothing to write home about. I must be very frank about that. Our exports are still far, far too low, but it was a record year. The same applies to FDI. The same applies to flows into the Colombo Stock Exchange. So these are still, the levels, overall levels are still too low, but we are moving in the right direction.
The 3.1% growth rate is one of the lowest the island has recorded in the last 16 years. He called the political stability to avoid reversing positive macroeconomic gains, which have led to higher exports, foreign direct investment and inflows to the Colombo Stock Exchange in 2017.
But the elephant in the room is the political situation in the country. And I am not aware of any country that has been able to make significant progress without political stability. So the restoration of political stability is of paramount importance. It is particularly important at this juncture because I think, and I hope I'm not being overly optimistic, I think we were beginning to see some progress in a positive direction, both in terms of strengthening the macroeconomic fundamentals of the country, as well as putting in place a framework that would give us sustained growth. So the important thing now is to keep on track. We must not deviate from what we have embarked upon. What has been done should have been done quicker, that's for sure. Things have gone too slowly, but I don't think this is the time to deviate from the path that we have embarked upon.
The Ceylon Tea Board inked an agreement with Dentsu Grants Limited for a global promotion campaign for Ceylon Tea. The decision to appoint Dentsu Grants Limited was approved by Cabinet last year.
The marketing campaign that we signed today with Dentsu Grants, it has been there for a long time. We have been talking about this and finally we signed it today. So that is a approximately $40 million campaign, global campaign, to position our teas in the international markets. Everybody has been wanting it for a long time, but unfortunately, because of bureaucracy and government red tape, it hadn't happened. So several issues that the tea industry faces that Mr. Vijayawardena and we will have to tackle.
The Ceylon Tea Global Promotion Campaign is funded by a tax on tea exports from Sri Lanka. The much-awaited promotional campaign was delayed reportedly due to tender issues and attempts by the Treasury to take over the funds. Addressing the media, Minister Dissanayake said Ceylon Tea attracts a premium price in the global market.
What is best for the tea industry has to be decided by the stakeholders. This is my policy. without any bias or prejudice. We must make decisions, long-term decisions. My focus will be mainly the price of tea, price of our tea. Any way that the Ceylon tea prices will be affected, we'll have a chain reaction among the smallholders, among the producers, and certainly it will have a social impact as well. So I can't allow anything that will be demeritorious to our price.
The minister is awaiting a Global Bank report on making regional plantation companies efficient and profitable for the long-term sustainability of Ceylon tea.
It's a governance act that I intend to bring for the RPCs, ensuring minimum standards are adhered to. The draft report of the World Bank will be given to me on the 24th. The final report. So depending on that report, then we will escalate it to the next level where we actually go for the World Bank funding and tie that up with the Governance Act. And then the RPCs will have to, through a consultative process, agree on certain things that we want. Certainly things like asset stripping, transferring of funds from parent companies to other companies in the group, ensuring minimum standards, pruning, weeding, yield per hectare, fertilizing the fields, replanting, all that has to be adhered to.
Secretary to the President, Austin Fernandez, said focus on the agriculture sector should not be neglected despite its declining contribution to the gross domestic product of Sri Lanka. He made these remarks at an international knowledge-sharing conference titled Innovative Models for Inclusive and Sustainable Agribusinesses Development through Public-Private Producer Partnerships held in Colombo. The conference was hosted by the Presidential Secretariat of Sri Lanka through its National Agribusinesses Development Programme and International Fund for Agriculture Development together with the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka.
Bulk of the poor are largely rural-based and majority rely on agriculture for their livelihood. Also, it is important to note that despite declining GDP contribution from agriculture, around 30% of the employed population in the country are still engaged in agriculture and are producing food for about 21 million people. Therefore, our focus on agriculture is justified. This further highlights that proper economic transition cannot be achieved by abandoning the agriculture sector. Instead, sufficient attention needs to be given to increase agriculture productivity by improving access to extension services and financial markets, introducing new technology and farming techniques, providing necessary advice, extension assistance to establish agro-based industries, which could create new employment opportunities for rural youth and improving rural infrastructure and marketing facilities so that the farmers could easily find markets for their produce.
We have been personally attending COP21 and COP22 as well. We find there is a lot goodwill on paper, as you call it NATO. No action, talk only. But if it comes to real implementation, you still lack because of various obstacles. There are politicians who want to see coal dominating because they earn some money in the coal trade. There are others who fear your transmission line are not working well. In Germany, we have days where 95% of all electricity comes from PV, and our voltage is still stable. So all these assumed obstacles are never happened to us. So what I see is that the people are very convinced by renewables, but there are some blocking forces. And to my knowledge, the production of renewable energies is even cheaper than the production cost of fossil fuels. Renewables are competitive. You need to have a legal framework which allows the people to make it very easy. We make it very easy for the people to invest in renewables. And here it's very complicated. You need one blessing after the other. And that's a time-consuming and a nerve-consuming process. Don't underestimate the local population. They intrinsically want to keep their nature beauty. They intrinsically want to have access to safe drinking water, to clean energy, and they don't want to have a landfill in their backyard. We should all work towards a green paradise island because the majority source of income is tourist. And if you want to have tourists, you need to make sure that you have peace among different ethnic groups, and that you have a nice preserved environment. And if you look into Germany, you could see that environmental protection is a business opportunity. So you do environmental protection and you develop your economy at the same time. We need to change the perspective that environmental protection costs a lot of money. Now it's the other way around. It helps us to gain money and to prosper in the future. So if we would like to become a mid-income or a high-income country, there is no way around in organizing investment in greening our future.
Stay with Biz1st Review 360. On the other side, we'll be joined by Mr. Dumindo Hulangamur from ENY to talk about the Inland Revenue Act, which will come into effect on the 1st of April. Welcome back to the program. The Inland Revenue Act, which was passed by Parliament last year, comes into effect on the 1st of April. There is still, however, some level of confusion among the public regarding what this act actually entails and how it will change the taxes that they have to pay to the government. To discuss this and more, we're joined by Mr. Dumindo Hulangamur, Head of Tax at Ernst & Young, ENY. Mr. Hulangamur, thank you very much for coming on the show once again. Let me start off by asking you, what are the key changes that we'll see when it comes to paying income tax?
So first of all, thanks Nadine for inviting me again to this program and to MTV, which has always been the forefront of discussing legislative changes. So to answer your question, the Income Tax Act, which was passed last year in September and now coming to force from 1st April, will have significant changes in certain areas. We didn't have capital gains tax for the last 16 odd years or 17 years. Capital gain has been reintroduced at a rate of 10%.
When you say on the subject of capital gains tax, let me just quickly interrupt you. This applies only to land and not to other forms of capital like shares?
No, capital gains will apply to, you see actually the word capital gains is not used in the law anywhere. It only talks about what is called investment income. So the words used is a realization of an investment asset. An investment asset has been defined to include land, shares, or anything that is held as an investment.
Bills, bonds.
Bills, bonds, anything that is held as an investment will be considered to be a investment asset. So that's a, I don't want to be very technically, there's a distinction between what is a business asset and what an investment asset is. So what is investment asset to you might be business asset to me, depending on what business I do. And what is business asset to me might be investment asset to you. So it all depends on, for example, for a property developer, this land will be business asset. Whereas for individual who is holding it as on a long term basis, it may be investment. So the same asset can have different ways that you treat. Even today is the same situation with that. So to answer your question is, it will include land, it will include shares in companies, and other assets that you have that are of investment nature. So that is one area of capital gains which we didn't have also. We were getting used to paying on that. Secondly, this law also has increased certain taxes. That is the employment tax, which is at 16% maximum, will go to 24%. So the higher bracket has been increased 24%. The concessionary rates for export, tourism, agriculture, etc., will go from 12 to 14%. Certain sectors like healthcare and construction, which we had concession rate, will go 28%. Then significantly is that whatever exemptions that prevail on the existing law that are not time bound, like providing services to people overseas, doing business outside Sri Lanka, all that will be liable to income tax. All the concession rate at 14, they will be liable to income tax, which we didn't have. Then of course all the exemptions have been removed, but they have reintroduced a new type of exemption called investment tax allowance. So like that, there are significant changes affecting business that has been brought into this act, with the intention of course of expanding the tax base, not necessarily the tax net, but the tax base, because exemptions are removed, the way that you tax is different, transaction types are, new transactions are getting taxed, so tax base has been increased, with the government revenue should go up. So those are the significant changes that will come into effect from 1st of April.
What about for individuals? Say for a person like myself, the pay-as-you-earn tax, the payee tax. What are the changes that we'll see in payee tax?
Yeah. So in payee tax, as an employee, the change that you see is, firstly, currently, an employee who draws up to 750,000 rupees per annum is not taxed as a threshold. And on top of that, if you give a travelling allowance, whether you use your own car or office car, up to 50,000 rupees is exempt. So basically, if I have 600 plus 750, it's about 1.3 million gets exempted for an employee. Then his highest rate of tax is 16%. Now, in place of that, inside the 1,350 that are exempt, they have given a threshold of 1,250 which is exempt. So actually, the people who are at a lesser bracket of income will enjoy a higher exemption, because earlier it was 7.5 lakhs. So those who did get travelling paid from 750 onwards. Now for 1,350 onwards you have to pay. But for those who are at a higher level of income, it will be now taxed at 24%, not at 16%. Rather, the maximum tax rate is 24%, not 16%. So there will be 8% increase of those in the higher bracket. So that is a significant change.
These are employees who are earning a monthly salary.
That's right.
At
the current employment 16%, will go 24%.
We also heard, it was reported in the newspapers this week regarding the savings and fixed deposits, the tax on savings and fixed deposits in banks being increased from 2.5% to 5%. Is that also a measure that was introduced through the Inland Revenue Act, or is that a new?
No, it is. It is. So currently, a senior citizen is currently exempt from income tax on his interest income. A senior citizen defined, I think, over the age of 60 or 57, somewhere around that. The others were liable to income tax at the rate of 2.5% on your interest income. So it's evolved over the years. It was 10% earlier, then they exempted a certain percentage, then they brought it. So to make it simplified, they put 2.5% flat, whether you are with the original income tax threshold, not 2.5% flat. So that has been increased to 5%.
How does a flat tax rate like that, do you think it takes into consideration, do you think it should be the case that when it comes to savings and fixed deposits, or should they be going for a more progressive tax model, even on fixed deposits and savings?
Yes, I mean, if you are talking from the point of view of equity and taxation principles, yes, because a person who earns 100 million in income in interest only pays 5%, whereas an employee who owns 100 million of employment income pays 24%. So there is a disparity in the rate of return, in the rate of tax. Now, for example, if you equate interest to dividend in a company, dividend tax at 14%. So interest is at 5%. So I'm not complaining, because someone might say I'm propagating the idea should go up. I'm not saying so, but to answer your question on equity, yes, the interest, if other sources of income are taxed at a higher, why interest at 5%? That is the question. But on the other hand, we look at also compliance, because why the government wants to, or successive governments have gone for a scheduled tax or withholding tax system, is that the recovery is much better. The cost of administration is very little, because when you have to collect tax from 1,000 people, here one person will pay the tax. The bank will pay on your behalf, right? So you have to only worry about one person. So the level of compliance and recovery is much higher on a withholding system. But if you have if you withholding tax, it can't be at a higher rate, because then the argument is that everyone may not pay 24% tax. Right. So if you want to go across the board, so it all depends what the objective is. So if the government, because to monitor the interest, if you go on the return and collect the tax as on a self-assessment basis, then the compliance cost is going very high for the government, because you have to monitor millions of depositors. Now here, when you put it on, how many banks and finance, maybe 100, and you say you pay 5% savings. So I think I have heard and I have seen from government people that the level of actually when they introduce withholding tax of 5%, or when you reduce to 2.5% rather, from the original rate, the collections went up. The tax collection went up.
So while the tax collection goes up, though, there is, on the other hand, of course, I'll get quickly before we go into a break, is it possible to eliminate these disparities and have a fair tax system while still managing to control your compliance?
No, you can. So I mean, you basically have to increase it to the. So you bring interest also as a part of your return as self-assessed system, and then monitor it. So on grounds of equity, yes, what you are saying is correct. Everyone should be paying based on capacity to earn. So if you go on that principle, capacity to earn, capacity to pay.
So it can be done.
Well, it can be done. I mean, it happened for the last only the last 10 years. We saw the withholding system working, but it can be done. For the cost of administration, compliance levels much higher. So,
yeah. Thank you, Mr. Lanka. We're going for a short commercial break. On the other side, we'll be talking more about the tax policy of the government. Welcome back to the program. We're in conversation with Mr. Duminder Hulangamu, Head of Tax at EY. We're talking about the new Inland Revenue Act, which comes into effect on the 1st of April. I also want to focus more generally on the taxation policy of the government. This is a, if you look at the newspapers, social media, a constant complaint that is leveled at this government is that taxes are increasing and that this is not reflected by an increase in public service delivery or more efficiency in public service delivery. When you look at the taxation policy of the current government, does it appear to you that it is mixed or confused, or do you see a pattern or some clear thinking and logic and reason going into it?
If you look at the taxation policy over the last 2 to 3 years after this government came in, you see there was, I would say that there was an effort to consolidate government revenue. That is to consolidate fiscal side of the government policy. So if you want to have low inflation and interest rates at a lower rate, then the budget deficit must be reduced. So if you are reduce the budget deficit, then you have to increase it by increasing revenue, or you cut down expenses. So you can cut down recurrent expenses, but capital expenditure you can't cut down because there is no development going to take place. So it's a very thin edge that you have to walk on, or the thin line. So the government revenue, the only way to increase government revenue is taxes, because Sri Lanka's government 82% comes from taxes, 80 to 85% is taxes. So we don't have oil or anything like that to tap and have. So if the budget deficit is to be remained, or reduce the budget deficit or maintain the budget deficit current levels, then either cut expenditure or increase revenue. Otherwise, you pay in some other form. Even if taxes are cut, you will have an increase in interest rates or inflation will go up, so you pay in some form. But whilst the government is consolidating revenue, in my view, there must be an effort to keep expenditure under control. So when you say expenditure, also 60 to 70% of the recurrent expense salaries of government servants. So to answer your question, when we are increasing public sector salaries, it must be done with an effort to increase their efficiency, to increase their contribution of what they are doing. So, in example, in the private sector firm, if you are increasing salaries across the board, we give it based on performance.
It's incentive.
I mean, there is a certain percentage that we might give based on inflation, but certain bulk of it goes on performance. So it's an incentive. Now, in government service, it doesn't happen that way, it goes across the board. So the last public salary increase, I think, was substantial. Whether we have got productivity, efficiency to the levels expected, I don't know. So that put a big burden on the government's revenue. Number two is our subsidies. So we can't do the subsidies, because for governments to be elected, the popular vote requires certain things to be given to them. One is for that, other thing is they can't afford, right, say fertilizer, or it is fertilizer or samurudya, whatever.
School uniforms.
School uniforms, I mean, they deserve it, they need to have it, right? So a government, because it's a socialist country also at the same time, so we need to keep the people who can afford, who cannot afford, also have to be supplied, right? You can't only think about the rich. So that will also cost money, and there is no productive income coming from that. So this is a battle that any government had to fight, my view, right? So that is why the government had increased back from 11 to 15%, the income tax consolidation taking place. So all that is done with the aim of reducing the budget deficit, right? So you have to pay in some form. If you don't pay in taxes, you might pay in form of higher prices for goods and higher interest rates. So
probably the easiest form to pay though would be to stop submitting supplementary estimates for 430 million rupees to buy vehicles.
yeah, so those are the extreme. Yeah, that's correct. So anyway, so like that, there are so many examples you can give. So my view is that this effort the last 2-3 years has been to consolidate government revenue. That may have achieved in my view, because I think for the first time we had a surplus in the primary account. We had increased government revenue of about over 15-20%.
And to be fair, the Inland Revenue Department has also reported an increase in the opening of tax files. Even before the current government came into power, there's been always talk from the IMF World Bank, from activists here in Sri Lanka, who say that there are revenue leaks that need to be plugged, tax evaders who need to be apprehended or who need to be prevented. Is this a serious problem from your point of view? Is this still a serious problem in Sri Lanka when it comes to tax evasion?
I would think so. I mean, this is not something unique to Sri Lanka. In most parts of the world, you get tax evasion, whether it's from the developed countries or to underdeveloped countries. Tax evasion prevails in most countries.
How big of a problem is it
in Sri Lanka? Also, I really don't know what the estimate would be. But I think it's a big problem. I mean, tax evasion does take place in two ways. One is those who don't comply, the others who are interpreting laws to their advantage, there are certain categories. So, with regard to those who are interpreting laws to their advantage, you can at least take it to court and fight it. But with regard to those who evade, you see, because the whole system has to be corrected. Because if you talk of corruption, there are two sides to it, the giver and the taker both. So both sides have to be tackled. But I must say, over the years, the government has, last government, this government, both have introduced measures to minimize this. So for example, now today, what are your biggest big ticket purchases? Is a motor vehicle or a land or a house or an apartment. Those are big ticket purchases. So someone who does not pay tax will definitely have to buy one of those items, right? So you can always, currently I know, any motor vehicle over 1500 cc, I think, if you purchase, the RMV sends information to the Inland Revenue. This is standard. Then the Inland Revenue will find first whether there is a tax file under that name. If there is no tax file, to that address is a letter asking the information. If you buy land, same, the respective land register will send it. So the information collection mechanism is there now, manually, and from there the department can call up people and check how you bought this car, how you bought this house.
So is that, because we're running out of time, let me quickly come. Do you, when you look at the provisions in the current Inland Revenue Act, and when you look at the current capacity of the Inland Revenue Department and other officers, public officers responsible for enforcing tax law, do you see the capacity to ensure that all of this is done and is done right?
Well, capacity in terms of manpower is there. If they want to do it, it's a will that they require, right? And we need honest people who can do it. See now, under the new act, the punishments are severe for tax evasion. The clauses for tax evasion are sharper than the existing law. There are
loopholes have been closed.
Most loopholes have been closed. Its punishment is much more than what it is. Imprisonment, 10 million, 25 million fine. How they will actually impose, I don't know, but Act provides for those things. The current law is rather loose. Now, for tax evasion, we don't have a clause in the current law. But in the new law, there is, if the dominant purpose to evade tax, they can cancel the transaction. So the provisions are there, like any other law, right? So whether they have to implement it is a different issue. So I think the capacity is there. Is a will that is required to do it. I mean, whether you put computers or human beings, the capacity is there. It's a will that you need to follow it through. You take one person, the others will follow.
Thank you very much once again, Mr. Ulagaro, for coming on the program and for explaining this to us. There's a question that is constantly asked when you discuss tax in this country. We all question, why should we pay taxes? In most countries, you pay taxes for the public services that you receive, from the collection of your garbage to better roads, better public transportation. Maybe in our case we're paying taxes for the right to complain that we aren't receiving these things. That's our show for this evening. I'll see you again same time, same place next week. Until then, good night and good luck.